Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Welcome to another Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast. Well, got a treat for you today. You know, I always talk about it's important that we tell a story. It's not that we tell a fantasy or a story that's fictional, but that we tell real life stories because honestly, our lives are stories. They're a series of chapters that we write, but we don't write this life and these stories of our life in isolation. They're integrated together. And so I had the pleasure of going to a good friend of mine's event, Dr. Naisha Winters. You all know her, I'm sure, well. Lovely person, love her to death. And yeah, Naisha, if you're watching this, that is true. You know, we're friends, colleagues, but I love you and your husband. You're great people. But I had a chance. She introduced me to somebody that I felt that not only did I need to bring her on the podcast, but I needed to tell her story, and then I needed to do a series of podcasts around this concept because I think it's so important to where we are today in the arena of disease and where we're going in trying to actually treat disease, but actually prevent it. Her name is Laura Zaspel, and she is director and really the star, in a way, of an episode of a series that you'll be able to find, and we'll let her tell where you can find that, called Farm Hero. Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a beautiful introduction. I appreciate it so much.
Well, you know, when I met you and I was hearing your story at this event, and I immediately went back and tried to find the series, but I couldn't. And then I got busy and forgot. And then I tasked my team to find it. And then as soon as they said, well, here it is, you know, you should have known how to find this. I was like, yeah, you're right. And then I binge watched them all. That first season, it was great. But you know, where can people? Let's start this off first. Where can people find Farm Hero?
You got it. So right now, the season has run on EarthX TV, which is DirecTV 267. So it's already, season 1 has come out, all 9 episodes, and now they're in reruns. You can also find it on Fubo. But what we're doing, because we're so purpose and message driven, is we have a YouTube channel. So once it goes through its life on EarthX TV, for every season, we're going to put it on a YouTube channel. So people can just go to Farm Hero YouTube channel, and maybe we can add it when the podcast come out so people can click on it. And sorry, are you hearing the dogs?
That's okay. They could be, you know, that's okay. You know, the dogs are part of the ecosystem, right?
Okay.
So, you know, that's okay.
Okay, good. So we're going to make it very easily accessible. We didn't go the Netflix or Amazon route just yet. People ask continually. But what we're really going for is not so much right now having the money exchange for, okay, good, we'll buy what you're saying and put it on, but now it's ours. We're going with, this is our message. And we might be sacrificing a little bit of accessibility in the beginning, but we're preserving the message and the purpose of Farm Hero, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're preserving the purity of it. You're preserving the authenticity of the message. And just so everybody knows, I found you finally on YouTube, and that's where I binge watched them. And we are going to put the link in the show notes. So don't go searching and not finding like I did, but it's easy to find. We will put the link right there where you can go right to it. So rest assured, you will find it right there. You know,
Awesome.
We were talking beforehand, Laura, that there's a disconnect between the food we put in our mouth and the story, because that's really a story about where the food comes from. and I want to dive into some of that aspects of the story because that's what you tell. But we have that disconnect. So for me, I had the pleasure of actually owning a farm, a 50-acre farm in Louisiana, some years ago. And I had a farmer, I needed to keep the fence line because I was not a farmer. I was a doctor, obviously, and I needed somebody to keep the fence line. And so he brought his cows out, and he in turn would keep the fence line. I let him graze. But it was really interesting because every Saturday morning I would go out there and he'd be out there tending to his cows, and I'd have a cup of coffee and we'd talk. And he was a farmer, he had chicken houses and stuff. And so one morning I asked him, because he was late, I was like, "Where were you?" And he said, "Well, you know those storms last night." I said, "Yeah, that was quite some storms that we had, and it was really bad storms." He said, "Well, I had some issues with my chicken houses." And I thought, well, maybe the storms blew the lids off. He said, "No, no, no. We had about 250,000 chickens die." And I was like, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, they had heart attacks." And so as I dove into the concept, it's because they give these chickens, they pile them in like sardines basically, and they aggressively move to harvest them in a very short order, and to do so because that environment is inhospitable to health, and it's actually very hospitable to parasites. They actually put in some arsenic and stuff to really protect against the parasites, because they're going to then harvest these chickens before the arsenic kills them. But in essence, what it did is it created an unhealthy chicken. So all of them piled in together, the stress of the thunderstorm, they all died of heart attacks. And so, people go, "Oh, well, I eat that chicken." But they don't understand that the physiology, the biochemistry of what ended up killing that chicken, we eat. And it encodes and involves us as well. So how these foods, products, whether they be cattle, whether they be chickens, whether they be fruits, whether they be vegetables, how they're raised impacts us. And your story here, I think, is beautiful because you're touching to that point that I think people forget about. What's your thoughts on that? Because that story sticks with me to this day.
And you know what you just said, the story sticks with you. And that's why we're storytelling as our method of communication. But I can even take it one step behind what you just described. I did a presentation, this was years ago. I did a presentation at the Denver Convention Center, and the topic was sustainable food systems. So I show up, and 75 people in the audience, maybe 100, very well educated people. And I brought live chickens with me. So it was a whole thing to get the okay to do it and the insurance. But my handler was there, the live chickens were there, they were in a wire pen. And I started off the conversation, the presentation with, "Okay, welcome to Sustainable Food Systems. Why do you think I brought live chickens?" And what do you think some of the answers were?
I have no idea.
They're cute. Maybe they'll
Yeah,
lay an
props.
egg. They're what?
Props.
Props. So the answer is they're food. Like that connection between the live animal and the chicken on your plate is so disconnected from adults, from children. And I had people raise their hands. How many people have eaten chicken in the last 2 days? I would say 90% raised their hand. But yet when they see the live animal, what they consumed, there's a disconnection. So there's disconnections everywhere. What I put in my mouth, and I think we'll probably get to school nutrition and children and learning, what we're feeding kids in school. We send them to school to learn and to be brighter. And what are we giving them? Food dyes, ultra processed food. And what does that do to their attention and learning ability? So exactly. So there's so many disconnections in food and in health that I love this conversation, because soil biome and food and nutrition and gut biome and the health of the body is so similar, so similar.
And here's another T-shirt. Soul biome. So SOIL, soul biome is food to my soul. SOUL biome. So just as I was watching all these episodes, I was like, wow, man, there's a great opportunity through messaging to really affect a change. And you have
Yes.
to understand, and people go, what are you talking about messaging? Everything's a narrative, right? I mean, everything's a battle for the control of the narrative, which in our environments today it's a very snapshot, which means we have to really narrow things down to engage people and then draw them in where you can then expand it out. And you did this very well through this. In fact, your opening quote, I think, is, I don't know if it was something that you toiled over, but it's really interesting because I think it really hit me every time I heard it. It is time to meet the pioneers transforming farming and food. I mean, that doesn't sound like much, but to me, that was a great launch with what each episode began with, because you're basically talking in pioneer standpoint, people that prepared the way, that went ahead. And it's actually a military term. It's really interesting, where they would go ahead and basically clear the path for the army coming forward. Now, this is not a military perspective, but I
But it
thought that was
applies.
really interesting. It definitely does, because they are the leaders of the change of our food supply. What do you think about that? Did you just come up with that on the fly, or did you work on it?
It came so naturally. I think it was written between a producer and I in probably 60 seconds, because we know that not only are they leading the way, and the military analogy applies, they're risking their lives, they're risking their necks, like literally, figuratively. These farmers, it's not easy to just change without somebody leading the way and somebody taking the bullets first, somebody sticking their neck out and taking the risk and showing the safe path. So Will Harris is a great example in Bluffton, Georgia, at White Oak
Mhm.
Pastures. He
Yep.
risked it all, honestly. His family cattle ranch, the legacy of White Oak Pasture. Money, let's get real here. They're taking a risk financially. Their mental health takes a beating, right? The worry. So, these pioneers are really heroes, because they're taking that risk, they're protecting others, they're leading the way, and they're showing how it can be done. And I think that was the most important thing for me, because we talked so much about regenerative agriculture and the beauty of it and nature. But you know what? Farming is hard work. Farming takes resources. Farming takes business decisions. At the end of the day, it's a business. So we really want, through Farm Hero, to give how can it look successfully. And I don't know if you remember Farmer Ted in the Ray Archuleta episode, but I asked
Mhm.
him, how is it going with regenerative agriculture and what you've done? And he paused for a very long time, and he teared up, and he said, it's not been easy. And that's the truth of it. And that's what we want to show. We want to show successes. We want to show ideal scenes to work towards. Why are we doing all this? But we also want to show the truth of it, that it had been hard on him, but we were out in the field, and he looked around at the health of his plants. And I asked, is it worth it? And he said, yes. So we really want to show it all.
Yeah, yeah, and it did, and I mean the stories here for the viewers and listeners, the stories are really touching. It's engaging, from the Gunnison Ranch in Colorado to the lady, the lady in Iowa. She's a pistol. I bet she was something else. But just I love the stories and the connections, and they walk through just not that this is farming and what how they approach farming, which I think is a story in of itself. But it's a family affair. That's kind of what I took at it from across the different stories that you told there, whether it be Tomcat or wherever it was. That it's a family affair. Is that something that you took home from that you knew going into it, or?
Uh, well, no, because we had to go look for ourselves. And that's why the TV series was so important, that we could travel and we could look and we could be light on our feet. There's so many stories, there's so many faces. and there's so many voices and perspectives. So I really went into this with that viewpoint that I've been hearing so much. Children do not want to take on the farm. They've seen their parents struggle. They've seen the chemicals and what they've done to the body. They've seen that they could make more money with selling to developers. We should probably do a little fact check and put it in the episode, but we're losing so many acres a day to development. So I went into it thinking, how are we going to solve this? Because children aren't taking on their parents' vocation in the farm. But you know what? With regenerative agriculture, they are, because they see a good example. We filmed, but hopefully it'll be in season 2, Darmali in upstate New York. They've raised their children. The children have had jobs since they were little kids. They want to be there. They've made their choice early on. They're healthy. They understand their connection. It's a dairy farm. They understand the connection between the healthy soil, the healthy grass, the healthy animals, the healthy milk, how it impacts children and adults in the community. So honestly, I went into it, what are we going to do? This is a real problem. And I knew regenerative agriculture, with the no-till, don't disturb the soil, keep a living root, livestock integration. But regenerative agriculture is also, how do we strengthen the family in agriculture? How are we going to solve this legacy farm situation? How are we going to want young adults, entrepreneurs, to get into agriculture and farming? So regenerative agriculture covers that as well, in my opinion.
Okay, so I actually had this question down a little bit further, but you just mentioned it, I think about 2 or 3 times. And in one of the episodes, I forget which one, you said we need to move from conventional and traditional agriculture to a regenerative and holistic agriculture. What is regenerative agriculture? Because you just mentioned that like 2 or 3 times. What is that word? Because when I first heard that, I was like, oh, I like that. But what actually is that? Then I watched all the episodes and I'm like, oh, I see what that is.
Great. And it's a great question. And honestly, the formal definition is still being worked on. But Gabe Brown and Understanding Ag have really laid it out very clearly, very analytically. So there's a few principles. Top of it is leave a living root in the soil at all times. When you go out and you see in Iowa or whatever state you're in and you see these bare farmland, and that's just, oh, that's farmland. That's what I used to think. There's just, nothing on it. But if we think about it, right? So keeping a living root in the soil, there's constantly the ecosystem happening. The organic matter continues. So leave a living root in the ground, cover crops. So cover crops have to do with that living root, but also when the season changes, when you're planting a cash crop, you're using that organic matter to feed the critters in the soil, right? The bacteria, the protozoa, the nematodes. So it's all the way nature does it. Let's just simplify it. Like, where do you go in nature? I'm looking out at Morrison, Colorado. How many different trees? How many grasses? We've got the chickens and the lamb, etc. So how did nature do it? They kept a living root. She keeps a living root in the ground, covers that land, keeps organic matter going through the cycle, right? The plants take in photosynthesis. The plants let out the lipids and the sugars, carbohydrates, to the bacteria, to the microorganisms to get back the nutrients. So keep a living root in the soil, cover that soil, livestock integration, whether you're eating meat or not. And the California episodes really dig into that. But the whole cycle of a cow eating the grass, going through its system, coming out, and then having those nutrients go back into the soil. Okay, so biodiversity versus monocrops. So you could do all one crop. Where do you find that in nature? Not often, except for on farmland. So you want biodiversity. You want complementary crops growing together that work off each other. Integration of insects, right? So important. Pollinators. So livestock integration, insect integration, have a living root in the soil, cover crops. So at the end of the day, it really is, how did nature do it? Regenerative agriculture, and then conventional agriculture is yield, yield, yield. How do we take this ground and get the biggest bang for our buck? Yield. Yes.
Let me say something there, but people think yield, and in fact, what was the farmer in Iowa? I just loved. That's one of the episodes I watched multiple times because she just. I'd love to sit down and have a cup of coffee with her. She had me cracking up.
Liz
But
Garst.
yeah, she talked about what she talked about morals over revenue. I think she made that statement. And what I say in medicine is profits over patients. So the
Mm-hmm.
same concept applies because in essence what you're getting at is when morals are overcome by profits in the farming industry, then what happens is we get more patients. Because what happens with the farm heroes or the non-farm heroes is we create a yield that is not good, because the assumption there is that the yield is a good one. It's a good one. It's full of nutrients. It's full of it's full of macronutrients. It's full of nutrition. It's full of health. But that high yield, actually, research has showed, even go back in the 1970s, it's depleted of vital nutrients our body needs to function and survive well.
100%. Agriculture became a chemistry problem, an input
Mm.
problem. How do we solve that as opposed to the biology and the health of the soil? So, so you're exactly right. Farmers should be getting paid. This is a more advanced concept, and it's coming. But farmers should get paid for the nutrient density of that apple, right? Right now, again, it's how many, how fast. But when is the apple tested for what it's doing to the body? It's not right now, but it's coming. And I also want to make a point because this can come across a little bit, oh, those farmers, not at all. And I always, when I'm communicating, when I'm presenting, we've all contributed to the way the food system looks now. As consumers, as policy drivers, whether we're farmers or not, this is not a wag your finger at the farmers. This is, okay, look what we have done as a group. We could have been asking questions. Why weren't we? We're spending our money. That's powerful. So this isn't that farmer did the wrong thing. No, let's look at the system and how do we not even fix it, but again, what's the more ideal system and how do we put that in place as quickly as possible for the benefit of the farmer, for the person in agriculture, for the consumer, for the child, for the society. I don't know if you saw that recent, it was put out by the White House. One of the top solutions for this chronic illness prevention is working with farmers to make more nutritious food. Boom. Like,
You know, I want to get into why this story, because clearly there's a story there. But what connected me to what you're doing is because it's two sides of the same coin with what I'm doing and what people like Naisha and others are doing. Is, when you said it's our own, we need to look in the mirror, that's kind of the phrase. And what I tell doctors is, look, the reason why we have such a disease-centric model now, where doctors actually have no role in connecting with their patients, it's all about, advocacy for confusion, which is we're advocates for everything but the patient. And the patient-doctor relationship's been destroyed. It's not because of the patient. It's not because of the system. It's because doctors have not stood up and said, look, no, this is what we need to do. So it is a self-reflection. And I agree that what we're dealing with is our own accord and of our own decisions. But in that also lies the power to change it. And what I tell patients all the time is they go, I have no power. When I go to my oncologist and they said, no, you can't do that, or nutrition plays no role, or that supplement or that repurposed medication plays no role, in your therapy. We're just going to destroy your body, hope you survive. And then on the flip side, hope you recover in a way that has a high quality of life for the rest of your life. And I said, no, actually, you have all the power because you can leave and you can go find another doctor that will engage with you as a partner. And so, because the old historic model was doctor speaking down to patient, but the new model is doctor and patient walking side by side. So I see that in what you said about the individual, the local community engaging with the farmer. So my question here is, part of the problem that we've had is this industrialization of farming where it's gone from that local community to one that is mass production and a national process instead of local. Do you see that as part of the problem and thus part of the solution?
100%. And let me just say that visual of the patient and the doctor walking side by side, how about the farmer too? Because, this patient eats 3 times a day, maybe more. So we're on the right path, putting all this together. So yes,
Well,
centralization.
what you're saying, I'm sorry to interrupt. What you're saying,
No,
Laura, is actually the farmer's more important than the doctor. That's really what you're saying. And I agree with that. When we're talking about disease prevention and a way to change the disease trend that we're on, which is a hockey stick, by the way, which is a statistical term, the real key way to do that is with the farmer.
yes. 100% agreed. And isn't it wild? And I would love your perspective because how did we get so far from in medicine from these moments? Like, I just saw the doctor for something that's happening in my gut. He never once asked what I eat on a daily basis. How do we get so disconnected? Because I've been really digging into how do we get so disconnected from having a live chicken to people making the connection. Oh, I eat that. I eat that animal, that chicken becomes protein and meat on my plate. Not even a thought. Not even when you think about the 50% food waste in America. And I say this, would you take one of those live chickens, throw it in the trash? That's what you're doing. So again, that disconnection between the live animal and food, and again, I don't look at it like, shame on you. I look at it, I've played a role. I'm in the food industry in Denver. So I've definitely played a role, but it's not about shame, blame, regret, right? It's about, wow, this is the state of food. What do we do about it? So for you, just as a blanket question, how did it get, because I'm actually reading Naisha's book right now, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. Your book is up next, and I'm
Oh,
sure it's going to be the same.
so I
Yes.
just happen to have it right here. So, hey, Naisha, shout out.
Shout out to Naisha. But, and I have 2 master's degrees, and for all purposes, I'm an educated person, and I'm in the food industry. But let me put this together. It's like, why don't I know about, I can't even say it, methylation? Why don't I know about how mitochondria really work and what to do about it? What I read, 90% of the energy and life in my body, 90% is coming from mitochondria activity. How do I not know this? How do I not know what to do to really get more energy? I've got my coffee right here. I rely on that. I think if you asked 100 people, 1,000, whatever, do you know what methylation is? And do you know what mitochondria are? How many people do you think would know, like even at a basic level, just people at a basic level, would they know those 2 terms?
I'll propose this to you. Would the doctors know those terms? And there's a lot of different, as is always the case when patients go, I've just been diagnosed with cancer. What caused it? And it's like, well, there's not one thing. Because I spent some time working as a doctor in North Louisiana. It's where my wife's from. Raised on a rural horse farm, quarter horses. So when you said you love horses, I know exactly what you're talking about. They're just big, gentle dogs. They're just wonderful animals. But I would see a lot of the farmers from the Delta, and they all struggled with the same triad of disease: lymphoma, leukemia, and Alzheimer's, dementia. It was because of the chemicals they dealt with every day. So I think when we look at it from a medicine perspective, I think one of the things you talk about, regenerative and holistic agriculture, that word holistic is something that I've honed in on for a long time, Laura, because the word holism, people go, is it with a W or without the W? And for me, I love words. I love to write. And so I got into an esoteric discovery mode, if you will. And there was this conversation, people that are more nerds than myself when it comes to words, about should it be WH or H? And I was like, wow, this is really nerdy. But the point here is the origin was holistic, WH. And the origin of that concept actually goes back to a gentleman by the name of Christian Smuts back in the early 20th century. He wrote a book in 1926 entitled Holism and Evolution. Now, he was talking here about the concept of the dominant scientific theory of the time was reductionism, which is, okay, we have this complex process, and so let's break it down into compartments to understand it. And so he was very frustrated because he was an educator. He was a prime minister of South Africa, also a philosopher. And he said, okay, the problem here is this is a top-down approach. And so if you think about it from an agricultural perspective, there's a central government approach, and then there's a local approach, top-down. And you can extrapolate that all over the place. But when you look at the problem with this is, okay, we understand in medicine, the body is insanely complex, no different than agriculture. But to understand it, we have to break the parts down. But what doesn't happen is the parts are never reconstructed back to the actual purpose, and that's the whole of the individual. So when you look at the model of medicine, it is a disease-centric model. Now, that was emphasized with what are called the CPT coding, the coding system by which it's billed to insurance. So it's interesting that when insurance stepped in, it further disconnected the patient from the doctor and the doctor from actually the physiology and biochemistry of the body. Just a little bit of an aside there. I think just as the individual needs to go back to the farmer, I think the doctor needs to go back to the patient. Anything that gets in between just tends to disrupt it. And so what happened is he said, look, what we need to do is we need to understand that each individual part only benefits because it works together for the whole. So he actually proposed, instead of a top-down, he proposed a bottom-up approach. And it's really interesting when you look at the concept of higher learning and cognitive function skills. This is a process of learning, of breaking it down and then building it back up, resynthesizing it. And what we do today is we break it down and we never resynthesize it. We just turn profit here, turn profit there, turn profit here, turn profit there. And what happens is, because the lack of synthesis never occurs, the whole of the individual doesn't benefit. They actually start to receive detriments from it.
Right.
And
the consequences.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are in a disease-centric world because we, the individuals, we, the doctors, have allowed it. We've allowed it. And it's time that we take it back. And the way we take it back is we recognize we have the power. Like you said, the power of the dollar, of purchase, the power of the patient to say, I'm going somewhere else. We have the power. And that's why what you're doing and what we're doing, I think, is so synergistic, because they are so intertwined on so many different levels. But it's a ground root. It's a bottom-up approach. And in so doing, I think that's the way we get health back. We get medicine back focused on what it is. And whenever I speak, Laura, and again, this is about your story, not mine, but it ties into what you're doing here. When I get up on stage, the first thing I ask is, I say, how many healers do I have in the audience? And I do that because I want to see and engage with the people that are there. What kind of doctors are they? If they're conventional doctors, they're going to, do this number and go, well, what does this guy think I'm a healer? What is he, snake oil salesman? What is that? Versus, people just raise their hand. I go, okay, these are people that understand what the word physician in Hebrew means. Rapha, it means healer. It means healer. And where you touched on education, the word doctor in Latin, dossier, means teacher. So our job, what you're doing is you're teaching people how to heal, but to heal through the soil, through the agriculture, through the engagement with the local farmer. And I'm doing that on a different level. But the reason why your story is so important is because I believe the impact has such a bigger impact than what I do. Because when I see a patient with stage 4 cancer, Laura, things are very off the rails. Okay. The cows have gotten out of the fence line. They're all across the place.
There's a
You know, they've
problem.
been hit by
There's a
trucks
big
on the
problem.
interstate. It's a big problem. Okay. And the question is that problem so far gone that it can be brought back? Your power is to actually prevent that from ever happening. And that's why what you're doing, I believe, is so important. And those farm heroes, I mean, that title is brilliant. They are heroes. They are
100%.
heroes. So
100%.
where did the name come from? Because I think it's a brilliant title, but where did that name come from?
You know, it was a collaboration between two of the other executive producers, and again, a lot of this just came naturally when I think about it. Like the name of my company in Denver is Serendipity, one of my favorite words of all time. I'm sure you, as a word lover, know serendipity, right? Natural gift for making fortunate discoveries by chance. So I'm very much a word person, just like you. What's the meaning? I don't play around sometimes with the words I choose or the words I use. So it was a collaboration, and I think it started off with hero farming, or it just kind of bubbled up. Farm hero, done. Farm hero, and off we went. Um, but I also want to touch on storytelling. Like I always say, the correct order of magnitude of communication. That's why we leaned into media, like what you're doing with podcasting, what others are doing with documentaries, storytelling. For us, that TV series reaching 100 million plus unique viewers a month, reaching 130 million households through various channels. That's the correct order of magnitude. When I hear you talk just now, if I want to take what you just said and get it out to millions immediately. And that's what media does for us. When I first met with Ray Archuleta, he's such a great guy, but he has the whys and the hows, and it's like, Ray, you go out and you talk to 100 farmers, and that's fantastic. Maybe even 1,000. It's not enough. Like, we need to take that message and put it on television. And one of the partners, Richard Lackey, has top shows in Africa. Africa's very different, right? 90% are in agriculture compared to Americans. I think it's less than 5%, maybe even less than 3 now. But so he's lifted millions out of poverty based on TV shows and adoption rate of regenerative agriculture principles. So we're very fortunate. We started with a very successful model of how you take a message, how you use media, how you build community. And I also want to get back to the question on centralization versus local. I think it's going to be everything and in between. It's not just black and white. There's a lot of gray areas, but definitely just having centralization, and we can go into processing of animals and the horrors of that. But centralization needs to be mixed in, because there's a time and a place for a resilient food system. But the most resilient has to value the local farmer, the local community, the local ecosystem, the victory garden, the coming together as a community in the community garden. That absolutely plays a role. So to answer one of the past questions, it all plays a role. And also this concept of, doctors and do no harm, but also with farmers and what they're putting on their crops, and the pesticides, the herbicides, the fungicides. You know what side means? To kill.
Oh yeah.
To kill. And
and we eat that, and we get surprised when it causes disease. It's like, well, everything that was put on that plant in that animal was designed to kill other things. And guess what? It doesn't just go away, it stays, and it accumulates in them, and it accumulates in us.
Correct. So we've got to move away from pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, kill, 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 to what do we promote today? What life do we, let's flourish and prosper. Let's expand. So yeah, just viewpoints and the storytelling, because like what we're talking about now, again, how many people have thought, oh yeah, pesticides, herbicides, fungicide, we're killing. What you just said, how does it absorb into the plant? The animal eats the plant. What did what you ate eat, right? So when the animals eat these plants, saturated in whatever sides have been applied, and then we take that flesh and eat it, what does it do to our body? And there's so much data on the detrimental consequences. And then there's a lot of data on the benefits of eating regenerative ag, super nutrient dense, clean food. So yes, storytelling is so powerful, and that's why we're using a TV series.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.